The night air clung to her skin like wet cloth, carrying the sharp scent of damp earth and crushed leaves. Every step through the underbrush made her heart thrum louder than the wind rattling the trees above. She could hear it, somewhere behind her, a soft, trembling whine that made her chest tighten with both fear and fragile hope. Her shepherd pup pressed close to her heels, ears pinned back, fur matted and muddy, eyes wide with a raw, innocent terror. The moonlight barely pierced the thick canopy, casting jagged shadows across her trembling hands, her scraped knees, the dark smear of blood along her ankle. She had never been this afraid, not in the storms that tore through her hometown, not in the long nights she had spent pacing the empty streets. But this fear was different. It wasn't just for her. It was for him, for the small life that had chosen her, the tiny heartbeat tethered to hers through sheer will and silent pleading. Somewhere beyond the thorns and the twisted roots, a sound, a faint, distant call, shivered through the night, promising rescue, yet threatening to vanish before she could reach it. Her lungs burned, her legs shook, and still, she crawled, each movement a desperate act of faith, each breath a fragile prayer she whispered to the cold, indifferent stars above. The forest pressed around her like a living thing, every branch and root clawing at her clothes and skin. Rain had fallen earlier, leaving the earth slick and heavy beneath her hands, soaking through her thin jacket and chilling her to the bone. She moved cautiously, dragging one foot in front of the other, feeling the mud suck at her boots, the mossy stones threatening to slide beneath her weight. Behind her, a soft whimper rose from the shadows, pulling at her heart. Her shepherd pup trailed close, every muscle tensed, ears pinned back, trembling as though the darkness itself could reach out and snatch him away. Her chest ached with a mix of fear and fatigue, a relentless pounding that echoed in her ears louder than the wind through the trees. Somewhere not far off, she thought she heard a branch snap. Was it the wind or something else? Every shadow seemed to shift with intent, a living threat she could neither name nor escape. She pulled the pup closer to her side, feeling his small body shake against hers, and whispered words she barely believed herself. "We'll be okay. Just keep moving." Her voice sounded small, fragile, swallowed immediately by the damp night air. Memories flickered like broken film in her mind. The warm mornings spent throwing sticks for him in the yard, the soft nudges of his wet nose against her hand, the way he had once slept curled across her feet, trusting her with a devotion that was absolute. That memory suddenly brought both solace and a fresh ache. She could not fail him now. Not when the forest seemed intent on swallowing them whole. Not when every step forward demanded courage she wasn't sure she still had. The underbrush tore at her legs, scraping skin raw through the thin fabric of her pants. Each step made her muscles quiver, each breath come harder than the last. Mud clung to her boots and caked her fingers, and every time she stumbled, the pup let out a distressed bark that made her chest constrict with guilt. She had never felt so powerless, so stripped bare of everything except a raw, burning instinct to survive. The world beyond the trees, the lights of town, the warmth of a bed, the smell of breakfast waiting on the stove, felt impossibly far away, as though she had crossed some unseen threshold into another reality. The night was not silent. Somewhere an owl cried, a haunting note that seemed to echo her own fear. The wind moved in sudden gusts, shaking branches loose that struck her shoulders and back with sharp taps, startling the pup into panicked whines. She could taste the metallic tang of blood on her lips, from a gash along her forearm where a branch had caught her. Pain radiated down her side with every movement, but she ignored it, focusing instead on the faintest hint of light between the trees. A star perhaps, or maybe the moon breaking through clouds. It didn't matter. Anything resembling guidance was enough to spur her forward. She paused for a moment, pressing the pup against her chest, feeling his heartbeat hammer in time with her own. His small body quivered, and she noticed the way his tail drooped low, how his eyes darted to every flicker of shadow as though expecting it to devour them. Tears threatened to spill, unbidden, and she let a few slip, mixing with the rain and mud streaked across her face. "I've got you," she whispered, clutching him tighter. "I swear I've got you." She could not remember ever feeling this weight of responsibility, this depth of fear interlaced with a strange, fierce determination. The forest seemed to stretch on endlessly, a maze of black and green, of mud-slicked roots and low-hanging branches that snagged hair and jackets alike. She felt her strength waning, her legs trembling beneath her, yet she forced herself to keep moving. She imagined the pup's life as fragile as a candle flame, a light she could not allow to go out. Each careful step became a meditation, a delicate negotiation with gravity, with the treacherous earth beneath her, with the unseen dangers that might be lurking just out of sight. A sudden noise made her freeze. Something, perhaps a fox, perhaps a falling branch, scurried through the leaves, and her heart slammed against her ribs. The pup barked sharply, a staccato sound that made the hair on her arms rise. She pressed him closer, feeling the warmth of his body through the wet fabric of her jacket, letting the sound of his fear anchor her own. Together they moved again, the rhythm of their steps and breaths syncing in a fragile, intimate pattern. Two lives intertwined against a vast, indifferent wilderness. Every so often she stumbled across a small clearing, each one offering a brief moment of reprieve. She would crouch, let the pup sniff the air, and close her eyes for a heartbeat, listening to the wind, the distant drip of water, the subtle rustle of movement somewhere beyond sight. These small pauses, fleeting as they were, allowed her to remember who she was, why she had to keep going. The forest was threatening, yes, but it was also alive, full of the smells and sounds that reminded her she was still here, still breathing, still fighting. Hours, or maybe minutes, time had lost all meaning, passed like this, creeping forward, halting, listening, trusting the pup to sense what she could not. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, fatigue weighed on every muscle, and yet she could not stop. The darkness was relentless, but so was her will. And somewhere deep inside, a stubborn ember of hope refused to die, flickering in rhythm with the pup's heartbeat against her chest. Eventually, she saw it, a faint, almost imperceptible glow between the trees, amber and soft, like a promise whispered in the wind. Her breath caught, a mixture of disbelief and longing pressing against her throat. Could it really be? Was she imagining it after so many hours of crawling, of fearing, of dragging herself and her trembling companion through the mud and shadows? She didn't allow herself to question it. She just moved, step by careful step, drawing the pup with her, feeling the weight of his trust as heavily as her own fear. The glow grew brighter, revealing shapes she could almost recognize. Broken trunks, wet leaves, the hint of a path. Her lungs burned, her knees scraped and bleeding, her palms raw from gripping roots and stones, but none of it mattered. She was moving toward something tangible, something alive, something that could lift them from the darkness that had swallowed them whole. And yet, even as she crept closer, she did not dare relax. The forest had been cruel and unyielding so far. It could take a step backward just as easily as it had pushed her forward. Every shadow, every distant rustle, reminded her of her vulnerability, and she pressed on, heart hammering, pup pressed tight against her side, every fiber of her being attuned to the dangers around them. The night was far from over, and their journey had only begun, but in that fragile moment, her fingers caked in mud, her hair plastered to her face, the pup's warmth against her chest, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself in hours, a sliver of hope, a possibility. That maybe, just maybe, they could crawl from the shadows into something like safety. The glow ahead had not lied. As she drew closer, the shapes of the clearing solidified, wet logs forming crude benches, a faint curl of smoke rising into the damp night sky, and the soft flicker of a fire that painted the world in amber and gold. For a moment she paused, feeling the weight of disbelief and relief pressing down on her chest like both a blessing and a warning. The pup pressed closer, sniffing the air, the small body vibrating with cautious excitement. She allowed herself to breathe, slow and deliberate, feeling her lungs fill with the tang of smoke mixed with wet pine and earth. But relief was a fleeting luxury. Every step toward the clearing was measured, tentative, as though the forest might reclaim her if she dared hurry. Roots twisted underfoot, slick with rain, threatening to catch her and send her tumbling into the mud. Her knees trembled, and the cuts along her shins burned with a raw, acidic sting. She whispered softly to the pup, steadying both his trembling and her own. Almost there. Just a little further, she murmured, though the words felt fragile even as they left her lips. The pup's whine answered her, small but insistent, a reminder that he too needed assurance in this uncertain night. Her mind reeled with conflicting emotions. Hope battled fear in every heartbeat. The glow promised salvation, yet the forest shadows lingered, long and patient, reminding her that danger had not yet released its grip. Memories flitted across her mind unbidden. Her mother calling from the porch as she left for a walk, the quiet morning spent brushing the pup's fur until it shone, the laughter she had shared with friends that now felt impossibly distant. Each memory was a knife and a bomb at the same time. cutting her with longing while keeping her tethered to a life she feared might slip away entirely. The pup stumbled over a slick root, landing against her knee with a soft thump. She caught him cradling his small, trembling body, and her hands shook as she checked him for injury. Mud streaked his coat, rainwater dripping from the tips of his ears, but otherwise he was whole. The relief was so acute it made her chest ache. She hugged him to her, feeling his heartbeat racing against her own, a fragile rhythm of survival that reinforced the bond between them. The forest could roar, the wind could lash, and still, this small creature had chosen her. And she him. That knowledge lent her courage she didn't know she had. She rose, brushing mud from her knees, and took another careful step forward. The clearing was still distant, the light flickering like a candle in the wind, but every inch gained felt monumental. She listened intently for any sound that might betray danger, hearing instead the subtle music of the forest, the patter of raindrops on leaves, the distant call of an owl, the whisper of wind threading through branches. Each sound became a lifeline, connecting her to the world outside her own fear, grounding her in a reality that demanded both caution and hope. Suddenly, a human voice broke the rhythm of the night, low and hesitant. "Hello," it called, carrying over the damp earth, soft yet penetrating. Her heart nearly stopped. She pressed the pup closer, feeling his small body shiver against hers. Could it be? She whispered his name softly, as if saying it aloud could anchor them both. The voice came again, steadier now, tinged with reassurance. It was real. There were others. They were not alone. The terrain grew rougher, roots snagging at her boots, mud pooling in shallow depressions. Yet every obstacle seemed surmountable now, infused with purpose. She remembered the small victories that had carried them this far, the shallow stream that had offered a brief cooling respite, the brief clearing where the pup had finally stopped trembling long enough to sniff the air without panic. Each memory of triumph strengthened her resolve, knitting together fear and hope into a fragile yet unbreakable determination. As the clearing drew near, she noticed details she hadn't registered before. Footprints pressed into the mud, a broken branch arranged to mark a path, the faint glint of metal catching firelight. Someone had been here, moving carefully through the same dark. Relief and gratitude collided with lingering caution. She whispered to the pup, his ears flicking at her voice. See, we're not alone." He barked softly, a hesitant, almost questioning sound, and she felt a laugh rise in her throat, wet with exhaustion and disbelief. The closer she came, the more the forest seemed to yield. The shadows lost their threat, becoming instead a dark frame for the amber light ahead. She saw the fire clearly now, low and steady, casting dancing shapes across the ground. Around it, figures moved. Humans, moving with deliberate care, scanning the forest as if they knew exactly where danger might hide. One of them spotted her movement, and a hand lifted in cautious greeting. Relief washed through her body in a rush so sharp it made her knees wobble. She was not imagining it. Rescue was real. The pup barked again, louder this time, responding to the scent and sound of other humans. He pressed forward, and she followed, taking careful, deliberate steps. Every muscle screamed with fatigue, every joint ached, but the promise of warmth, of safety, of being pulled from the cold grip of the forest spurred her onward. She felt the tension in her shoulders ease fractionally, her breath lengthening as the weight of hope replaced the suffocating pressure of fear. And yet, even as relief seeped in, doubt lingered. How had they been lost for so long? Could something still be waiting in the shadows? She clenched her jaw, feeling the pup shift beneath her grip. His trust was absolute, and it demanded hers in return. She whispered to him, a vow half to herself, half to the night, "We're going to be okay. I promise." The words felt like fragile armor against the cold and wet and fear that still lingered in the edges of the clearing. When she finally stepped into the light, the figures around the fire turned fully toward her, their faces a mix of caution and relief. One of them, a tall woman with a coat streaked with rain, crouched down, arms open. "It's all right," she said gently. "You're safe now." The pup yipped, pressing against her, and she felt tears spill unbidden, mixing with mud and rain. She let herself fall to her knees, holding the pup tight, feeling the pulse of his life against hers. Every sob, every tremble, every heartbeat was a testament to the journey they had endured together. She noticed the details now. The smell of smoke and wet earth, the crackle of the fire, the way the other humans moved with quiet efficiency, offering blankets and water. The pup leaned into her, licking her cheek, eyes wide but beginning to settle. The forest still loomed beyond the clearing, dark and indifferent, but within this small circle of light, safety existed. For the first time since the night had begun, she allowed herself to hope. Hope, she realized, was a fragile thing, nurtured carefully, protected like a newborn flame. But even the smallest ember could grow into warmth, could guide a trembling pair through the shadows. She inhaled deeply, the smell of wet pine and smoke filling her senses, grounding her, reminding her that they had survived. That she had survived, that they had survived together. The pup pressed against her chest, his warmth a steady reassurance, and she whispered once more, voice trembling but certain, "We're going to be okay, really." In that moment, the firelight dancing across her face, the pup nestled against her, the faint rustle of the forest just beyond. She understood that fear could never fully vanish, but neither could courage, love, or hope. And as the first stars of dawn began to pierce the night sky, she allowed herself to believe, fully and unguarded, that maybe the darkest hours were behind them. The clearing was small, a fragile island of warmth and light amid the endless forest, but it could not last forever. She knew the moment she stepped beyond it, the dark would claim her again, wrapping its cold fingers around every exposed inch of skin. She stood at the edge, the pup pressed to her chest, eyes wide with both trust and fear. Somewhere beyond the trees, the wind moaned, a haunting sound that whispered of branches snapping and unseen creatures shifting in the darkness. Every instinct screamed for caution, yet she felt a pulse of determination she hadn't known she possessed. They could not stop now, not when safety was almost within reach. The forest floor beyond the clearing was a treacherous mosaic of slick roots, deep puddles, and twisted undergrowth. She lowered the pup carefully, his small paws sinking into mud, ears flicking at every sound. Careful," she whispered, voice steady despite the tremor of fear in her chest. Her own boot slipped twice, sending shivers up her legs, but she pressed on, guiding the pup with gentle hands. Every careful step demanded full attention, a delicate negotiation with gravity and instinct. The air smelled of wet earth and decay, of leaves rotting in the black, damp soil. She breathed in, forcing herself to stay present, to notice every detail, every potential hazard. The pup whimpered, nudging her hand, and she crouched, checking him for scrapes, for signs that exhaustion or fear had caught him off guard. His fur was matted, rain-soaked, but otherwise intact. Relief flooded her chest, mingling with a surge of adrenaline. She whispered his name, pressing him close. "We're almost there. Just a little further." The words were both a promise and a command, a tether between their two hearts in the unforgiving night. The pup leaned into her, trusting her utterly, and she drew strength from the weight of that trust. As they moved, memories clawed their way into her mind, each one a reminder of what she was fighting for. The soft morning light when she had first held him, the tiny tentative steps he had taken toward her, trusting her guidance. The quiet nights when he slept at the foot of her bed, ears flicking at every noise, body curled in contentment. That trust, once fragile and innocent, had now become a lifeline. She could not fail him, not in the way the forest seemed intent on threatening. Every tree, every shadow, every rustle of wind felt like a gauntlet, but the pup's steady presence lent her courage she had forgotten she had. The terrain worsened with every step. A fallen tree, slick with moss, blocked their path, forcing her to lift the pup over it, mud sliding from his small paws as he protested with a soft, frightened yelp. She gritted her teeth, muscles screaming, but managed it, setting him down on the other side with careful hands. The effort left her breathless, chest burning, but the pup's small, trusting eyes met hers, and she felt a surge of protective resolve. Each obstacle became a testament to their resilience, a silent proof that even the smallest and most vulnerable could navigate the harshest challenges together. Branches snagged her hair and clothes, cutting small lines into her skin. Rain-slicked roots twisted beneath her boots, threatening to pitch her forward into the mud. Yet she pressed on, step by careful step, guiding the pup, whispering encouragements, her own fear masked beneath a veneer of focus. Every rustle in the underbrush made her heart spike, every crack of twig a reminder that the forest had not yet surrendered. She learned to move in rhythm with the night, each step synchronized with the pup's hesitant pace, each breath measured, deliberate, a steady counterpoint to the chaos around them. Somewhere deep in the darkness, the faintest glimmer of light appeared again, a reflection on wet leaves, a break in the canopy that hinted at the sky. Her chest tightened with hope, but she forced herself to stay vigilant. The forest had tricks yet, she knew, Safety could not be assumed until they had left its grasp entirely. Movement of subtle cues of movement, a sound of hidden danger. The pup's trembling slowed slightly, a small victory that bolstered her own weary body. Hours, or what felt like hours, passed like this. Forward pause, cautious observation, careful encouragement. Gnawed at her stomach, fatigue weighed on her limbs, and yet the rhythm of survival carried them both onward. She noticed details she had missed before. A bird's distant call, the way water pooled in hollows of moss-covered roots, the earthy scent of soil mixing with rain-soaked foliage. Each detail was a lifeline grounding her, reminding her that life persisted even in the most threatening circumstances. A sudden snap of a branch made her freeze, her pulse hammering in her ears. The pup barked sharply, pressing against her chest. She held him close, listening, waiting until only the wind moved, sighing through the trees. The danger had passed for now, but the moment reminded her that vigilance was their only ally. Fear was a companion as constant as the pup beside her, and she had learned to coexist with it, drawing strength from the very thing that threatened to break her. She pressed on toward the faint glimmer of light she had glimpsed earlier, the forest slowly thinning, giving way to the rough outline of a path. Each step became less of a struggle, guided now by the subtle cues of human presence. A disturbed patch of leaves, a broken stick laid across the path, the faintest echo of voices in the distance. Relief mingled with tension, a heady mixture that made her pulse race. She was close but not yet safe. The final stretch demanded everything she had left, every ounce of courage and focus. The pup, sensing the shift in energy, barked softly, tail wagging despite the exhaustion. She smiled, a rare, shaky expression that was part relief, part disbelief. "Almost there," she whispered, holding him close as they approached the path. The light ahead now was unmistakable, flickering like a beacon through the thinning trees. The air smelled of fire and smoke, mingling with the wet earth, warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the cold, damp shadows that had clung to them for so long. And then she saw them, figures moving cautiously along the path, flashlights cutting arcs of light through the dark. One of them, a woman, knelt as if expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. The pup barked, and she felt tears prick her eyes. They were here, real, waiting. The last leg of the journey was upon them, but she was no longer alone. The forest had been a crucible, testing her limits, demanding every ounce of her resilience, and she had endured. Together, she and the pup had crossed the divide between fear and hope. Every step now was lighter, though still careful. The last few feet seemed suspended in time, a fragile bridge between the terror of the dark and the warmth of human presence. When she finally emerged onto the path, the figures turned fully toward her, expressions softening as they took in the sight of her and the pup, exhausted, muddy, trembling, but alive. Relief surged through her like a tide, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she allowed herself to exhale fully, to let the weight of fear and fatigue fall away, if only slightly. The woman crouched, extending her arms. "It's all right," she said gently. "You're safe now." The pup leapt into her embrace, pressing against her chest, ears flicking nervously but settling against warmth. She sank to her knees, clutching him, feeling the pulse of his life against her own. Tears slipped freely now, mingling with mud and rain, a raw, unfiltered expression of relief, exhaustion, and the enduring bond between them. The forest was behind them, but its lessons, resilience, vigilance, trust, would linger forever. She looked up at the figures around the fire, seeing eyes filled with understanding, empathy, and quiet admiration. Her journey through darkness had not ended, but she had crossed a threshold. The path forward was still uncertain, but for the first time, she felt the fragile certainty of hope. The pup pressed his nose against her hand, eyes bright, and she whispered, "We made it. We really made it." The forest loomed beyond, dark and silent, but within this narrow path of light, they had survived together. The clearing grew larger now, but the firelight was still just beyond reach, flickering through the trees like a promise she dared not fully trust. The pup pressed close, nudging her hand, his small body trembling with anticipation and lingering fear. Every muscle in her legs ached. Her hands scraped raw from gripping roots and rocks, but she forced herself forward. The forest had tested her, beaten her, and yet it could not break the bond that had carried her this far. Every step felt heavy with exhaustion, but lightened by hope. The fragile, trembling hope that they would finally reach safety. Smoke curled through the trees, warm and familiar, carrying with it the faint aroma of cooking fire, damp wood, and human presence. The scent made her throat tighten. She had almost forgotten what warmth could smell like, what comfort could feel like against skin chilled by night and rain. She inhaled deeply, letting it fill her lungs, and felt the pup shiver less against her chest. He seemed to sense what she felt, relief mingled with cautious optimism, the understanding that the worst of the darkness might finally be behind them. Branches scraped at her shoulders, roots tugged at her boots, yet she moved deliberately, careful not to stumble in the final stretch. Every step was a negotiation with fatigue, every breath a small victory. She remembered the first moments of panic, the way the forest had seemed to stretch endlessly, suffocating and cruel. And yet here she was, inching toward light, toward human voices, toward the fire that promised warmth and safety. The contrast between fear and hope made her pulse pound in her ears. Then she heard them, voices faint but unmistakable, calling gently through the trees. "Over here! We've got you! We've got you!" Her chest constricted, tears pricking her eyes. Could it be real? Could it truly be real after hours of crawling, stumbling, and shivering through mud and shadows? The pup barked softly, tail wagging in hesitant excitement, and she felt her courage swell. Every weary step forward now carried the weight of certainty, the knowledge that survival was not just a possibility, but within reach. The forest floor was treacherous even in this final stretch. Mud clung to her boots, roots twisted and snagged, and branches lashed at her like the fingers of some dark, angry hand. She stumbled once, almost tipping the pup from her arms, but caught him, heart hammering, hands slick with rain and earth. He whimpered, a soft, terrified sound that drove her forward with renewed urgency. They had come too far to falter now. Every scrape, every bruise, every tear shed in the darkness had led to this moment. Light spilled over a small rise ahead, flickering across wet leaves and slick rocks. She saw the fire clearly now, low and steady, crackling with warmth that made the night feel almost alive with life. Shadows danced across the surrounding trees, creating the illusion of movement of watching eyes, but she did not falter. The pup's small, quivering body pressed against hers, a living compass guiding her heart, and she let herself follow instinct and trust alone. Voices drew closer, human and steady, calling gently, offering reassurance. She saw figures moving through the firelight now, their forms blurred but familiar in the way fear and hope recognize one another. One figure, a tall woman with a waterproof jacket streaked with rain, crouched slightly, arms open, inviting, protective. "It's all right," the woman called softly. "We're safe now." The words were a balm to her raw, aching body, and she felt tears slip freely, mingling with mud and rain. The pup barked, a hesitant, joyful sound pressing closer to her chest. She lowered herself slowly, letting the warmth of the fire brush against her wet skin, feeling the first true sense of safety she had known in hours. Every muscle relaxed fractionally, every shiver of exhaustion finding release. The forest loomed dark and silent beyond the clearing, but inside this fragile circle of firelight, life persisted. Survival was tangible now, not an abstract hope but a living, breathing reality. Her hands shook as she set the pup gently onto the ground, checking his small, wet coat for injuries. Mud clung to his paws, and the rain had plastered his fur to his tiny body. But he was unharmed. Relief surged through her in waves, warm and almost dizzying in its intensity. She pressed her forehead to his, feeling the rapid beat of his heart against her cheek, a rhythm that matched her own frantic pulse. "We made it," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. "We really made it." The firelight revealed other rescuers now, moving with quiet purpose, offering blankets, water, and soft smiles. Their presence was grounding, each gesture a reminder that the world beyond the forest had not abandoned her. She noticed the warmth of the flames licking at her soaked jacket, the smell of smoke and pine mingling with wet earth, the distant murmur of conversation carried across the damp night. For the first time, she could breathe without the constant gnaw of fear pressing against her ribs. Yet even as relief washed over her, the forest remained an imprint on her body and soul. Cuts along her arms and legs throbbed with memory. The chill of the night lingered in her bones, and the fear that had gripped her so completely refused to vanish entirely. But in its place now grew something stronger, a fragile, fierce confidence, tempered by struggle and bound to the small, unwavering life at her side. Every step, every misstep, every shiver of terror had brought them here, and she allowed herself to feel it fully. Survival was no longer a question. It was a reality. The pup nestled into her lap, warm and trusting, and she wrapped her arms around him, feeling the pulse of life against her chest. The crackle of the fire, the rustle of leaves beyond the clearing, and the gentle murmurs of rescuers blended into a symphony of endurance and care. She leaned back, letting her head rest against a damp log, and allowed herself to feel exhaustion, relief, and gratitude in equal measure. The night had tested every ounce of her strength, every beat of her courage, and they had survived, not just physically, but together. Through the firelight, she glimpsed faces softened by empathy, eyes that had seen the terror of the forest but recognized the triumph of her endurance. A blanket was draped over her shoulders, warm against her chilled skin. The pup yawned, stretching, and she allowed herself a small, weary laugh. It sounded strange in the quiet of the clearing, almost foreign after so many hours of fear, but it was real, unfiltered, a tiny celebration of survival. Even as the warmth seeped into her chilled body, she knew the journey was not yet over. The forest would remain, dark and indifferent, and scars, both visible and unseen, would linger. But she had crossed the threshold from fear to hope, guided by the unwavering trust of a small, trembling pup who had refused to leave her side. That bond, forged in terror and tested in the shadows, would endure far longer than any ache or bruise. For a long moment, she simply sat there, pup in lap, feeling the firelight wash over them both. She listened to the faint wind in the trees, the distant drip of water, the subtle rhythm of life beyond the clearing. The world was vast and different, sometimes cruel, but here, in this fragile circle of warmth and care, it was possible to survive. It was possible to endure, and it was possible to hope. She whispered once more to the pup, voice trembling but resolute. We made it through the darkness, together. The pup pressed his small head against her chest, eyes closing, trusting utterly, and she felt an unspoken promise pass between them. Whatever lay ahead, they had survived the worst of the night, and that survival was enough to light the path forward, one careful step at a time. The first pale fingers of dawn stretched across the horizon, brushing the forest canopy with soft light that turned rain-slicked leaves to molten gold. She stirred slightly, the warmth of the fire behind her now replaced with the gentle caress of morning, and felt the pup shift against her chest. He had slept fitfully, ears flicking at each bird call, each distant rustle, but now he was calm, trusting entirely in her presence. She took a deep breath, tasting the crisp, earthy air that had replaced the acrid smoke, and for the first time since the forest had swallowed them whole, allowed herself to truly feel relief. The clearing, now bathed in early sunlight, looked almost gentle, its harshness softened by the warm glow. The mud-streaked ground, the waterlogged logs, and the tangled roots that had once been obstacles now gleamed like jewels under the morning light. She looked down at the pup, brushing damp strands of fur from his eyes, and marveled at how small and delicate he still seemed despite the trials of the night. He licked her hand, a soft, trusting gesture that spoke more than words ever could. We survived together. The rescuers moved around them, tending to other travelers and creatures who had been trapped by the night, but they gave her space, recognizing the intimacy of the moment. She knelt, pressing the pup to her chest again, feeling the steady beat of his heart, his tiny body warm against hers. Every breath, every pulse was proof of their endurance, a tangible affirmation that the darkness had not claimed them. Her hands shook, not from cold anymore, but from the sheer emotional release of the journey that had begun in terror and ended here in fragile safety. She remembered the fear that had gripped her in the earliest hours, the way every shadow had loomed as a predator, the way each crack of branch and rustle of leaves had made her heart pound like a drum. That fear had been visceral, consuming, all-encompassing, yet it had been tempered by the pup's presence. His trust, his quiet insistence on moving forward, had anchored her when she felt she might fall apart. Now in the gentle morning, she understood the depth of that bond, how it had carried them through the worst of the forest's cruelty, and how it would endure beyond it. The forest beyond the clearing seemed less threatening in the daylight, though she knew it had not changed. Its darkness was simply muted by light, and yet the contrast offered perspective. They had navigated the treacherous paths, the mud, the roots, the unseen threats, and had emerged whole. Each bruise, each cut, each shiver of fear became a testament to survival. The pup stirred in her arms, tail flicking lazily, ears relaxed, and she laughed softly, a sound that was both exhaustion and delight, mingling with the morning birdsong. She stood slowly, brushing mud from her clothes, the pup held securely in her arms. The rescuer stepped forward, offering blankets and water, but she waved gently, wanting a few moments more with him. She traced her fingers along his damp coat, feeling the smoothness of his fur and the subtle rise and fall of his breathing. "We're going to be okay," she whispered again, as much to herself as to him. The words were no longer a promise born of desperation. They were a truth she could feel, solid in her chest, carried in the rhythm of his heartbeat against hers. The clearing, now fully illuminated by dawn, revealed subtle beauties she had not noticed in the dark. Droplets of water, glinting like diamonds on leaves, delicate mushrooms clustered in the mud, the soft curve of a branch catching the early light. The forest, once a place of fear, now seemed alive with quiet wonder, a reminder that life persisted even amid trials. She inhaled deeply, letting the scents of wet earth, pine, and distant flowers fill her senses, and felt a wave of gratitude that stretched beyond words. They had survived, and in doing so had discovered the fragile beauty woven into even the darkest nights. The pup nuzzled her neck, pressing close, and she laughed softly, brushing his ears back. "You were amazing," she murmured, voice thick with emotion. "We both were." He blinked at her with wide, trusting eyes, and she felt the weight of their shared ordeal settle into something softer, quieter, a bond cemented by fear, endurance, and unconditional trust. It was a bond that would not fade, a tether that had carried them through darkness and now allowed them to breathe in the light together. The rescuers approached again, smiling gently, acknowledging the triumph of what she and the pup had endured. They offered small words of comfort and admiration, gestures that felt like a balm to her ragged spirit. She accepted a warm blanket, wrapping it around her shoulders, feeling the chill retreat and the warmth of human kindness seep into her bones. She watched as the pup explored the clearing cautiously, sniffing at the wet grass, tail wagging, and she felt a profound sense of peace. The forest, the night, the fear, they were behind them, leaving only memory, lesson, and the quiet glow of survival. She thought back on the moments that had defined the journey, crawling through mud, navigating routes that seemed intent on tripping her, the pup trembling against her, every shadow a threat. She remembered the small victories, the shallow stream, the faint glimmer of light, the sound of human voices that had guided them toward the clearing. Each memory carried both pain and triumph, and she let herself feel it fully, without fear of being overwhelmed. They had endured, and in enduring they had discovered something precious, the strength to face darkness and emerge into light together. As the sun climbed higher, the clearing transformed completely, bathed in gold and warmth. The pup settled beside her, resting his head on her lap, eyes half closed, breathing steady and calm. She stroked his fur gently, feeling the soft rise and fall of his body, and whispered softly, "Oh, we're home now. Really home." She felt the tight knot of tension in her chest loosen, a long-held fear melting away under the gentle insistence of morning and safety. For the first time since they had entered the forest, she could simply sit and breathe, allowing the quiet strength of survival and love to fill every exhausted muscle. The forest behind them remained dark and silent, but it no longer held power over her. Its shadows could not erase the memory of warmth, trust, and hope she had discovered. Every cut, every scrape, every trembling moment had led to this clarity. That survival was never just about escaping darkness, but about the bond and courage that carried them through it. She looked at the pup, sunlight glinting in his eyes, and smiled softly, a quiet, luminous affirmation that the night was over, the danger past, and life, fragile yet persistent, would continue. She rose slowly, letting the pup follow, each step measured, deliberate, carrying both gratitude and resolve. The clearing opened onto a small path that would take them back to safety, but she lingered a moment, letting the morning fully wash over her. She inhaled deeply, tasting the crisp, earthy air, and felt the pulse of life around her, the forest alive in its quiet, persistent way, the fire reduced to glowing embers, the faint murmur of rescuers moving gently through the clearing. It was a world restored, and they were a part of it once more. And as she stepped forward, pup at her side, she realized the forest had not broken them. It had refined them. Fear had been transformed into courage, darkness into perspective, and despair into enduring hope. Every moment of terror, every shiver and sob, had led to this fragile, luminous clarity. That survival was not simply the absence of danger, but the presence of love, trust, and the unwavering bond that had guided them through the night. In the quiet, golden dawn, she whispered once more to the pup, voice low and certain, "And from now on, we face the light together. The pup pressed his small head against her, eyes closing in trust, and she felt, finally and fully, the poetic weight of what they had endured. A journey through shadows, now ended in luminous, tender clarity, a life reclaimed from the darkness, and a bond that would never be broken.